From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there, and welcome to the show. So, when the auto show opened in Chicago a couple of weeks ago, it was said that for the first time, every vehicle on the floor had connectivity. That means you can access the internet in some fashion or another inside your car. Sometimes it's just a jack that connects with your smartphone, but in many cases it's essentially kind of a big old smartphone that's built right into the dash to access your digital life. Now this is big news, and something we'll all quickly come to accept probably as routine in a couple of years, but it's huge news for the people who own great big expensive radio stations, because radio broadcasting is about to feel that same lash of the internet that the newspapers have been beaten up with over the past 10 years or so. Let's look at one really sort of goofy example, okay? This little show. Now, you can watch it here on Can TV, of course, but as we always say at the end of the show, it can also be heard on iTunes as a podcast. So you could be hearing us through your earbuds on the red line right now as we speak. Kind of like radio, but without the 50,000 watt transmitter or the electric bill or the impossible to get broadcast license. But now let's take it a step further and say that we stream Chicago Newsroom out via the internet as a live stream. Now you can be walking around with your Galaxy and hear the show right as it happens, or more importantly, tuning it in on your newfangled car thingy that looks and feels like a radio but is actually tuning to a cellular signal just like your phone does, and not to AM or FM radio waves, okay? Now that's a lot like radio, isn't it? And more to the point, your smartphone is kind of like one of those old FM Walkmans, and the thing is competing directly with Clear Channel and Cumulus. Well, okay. So today on the show, we got three people who are building business models that are betting that they can compete for your ears against the conglomerates that own every radio station in America by building what's essentially a news radio station, but one that lets you decide what stories you want to hear and when you want to hear them, by giving you very, very local news, again, when you want it, and specifically by the communities you're interested in, by creating podcasts that are kind of like radio shows but targeted to very specific audiences and again available when the audiences want them. So our transmitter is going to be obsolete, just like printing presses. Well, the future of broadcast radio today is the topic on Chicago Newsroom. And I am so happy to have with us today Tim Akimoff, Director of Digital Content over at Chicago Public Media, otherwise known as WBEZ. Jon Hansen, also joining us for the first time. He's News Director over at DNAInfo Chicago. And the esteemed, august Charlie Meyerson.
I'm both esteemed and august.
Joining us for about the 17th time. He is right now head of news at Rivet Radio, with a head full of news. And Charlie, we heard the thing the other day about Mike Madigan sending the Metra had the little boxes full of 3x5 cards that people they had to hire. And I went down to the basement at Can TV and looked through it, and sure enough, here it is. Mike Madigan says you have to have Charlie Meyerson on the show at least every 3 months. So
I think you're about 6 months behind schedule. I have to call Mr. Madigan right away.
We're in trouble with Madigan, but hey, we can deal with that. All right, so we want to talk about this stuff, but if you wouldn't mind, maybe I could turn to you just briefly as the guy with the head of news. We just have to talk for just like 2 minutes about this thing that's going on with Mayor Emanuel and Springfield and the pension plan that does not include the firefighters and the CTU and the cops, but he says is going to solve everything. What's your take on it?
It's interesting.
Yeah.
I have to confess up front, I've not been following this in detail because I understand. Kind of busy
you have a lot of other things to do. But you putting this in just sort of a broad context.
Mayor Emanuel has been at this for a couple of years. He went down to Springfield a couple of years ago to make a pitch for reform and sort of sounded one of the first bells, the alarm bells for this. And he's been pretty persistent in the months since then in making the case that we need change. And just as an observer of the broad political landscape, without getting too much in detail, I think the tide has turned, and I think that I think for better or worse, and I don't want to take sides, that the consensus among just about everyone now is that something needs to be done. I'm not sure that was the case a couple of years ago.
I mean, when you say that something needs to be done, one of those things is dinging the taxpayers. I mean, it's interesting that, whatever you think, it's a pretty courageous thing to stand up right before your election, even though, of course, everybody knows that you're mayor for life if you want to be, but to still say, hey, we're going to have to raise property taxes to get this done. Of course, there are a lot of people who say there are other ways to get the money besides property taxes, but still, he is at least willing to put some money on the table, but it's gonna hit the pensioners pretty hard.
It is, and it'll hit the taxpayers if it happens. There's no guarantee it will. I mean, paralysis is still a real possibility here.
Yeah.
But the escalating alarm bells from the bond rating houses and the investment community about the state of Illinois and Chicago's finances has been pretty consistent in pushing for something to happen.
Yeah. All right. Well, I just wanted to at least acknowledge that there is major news going on today while we divert to talk about something that we're all just really interested in. This thing about radio, all of us have had experience in media, radio largely, and I think we all pretty much love radio, but we're all seeing that the business model is just really coming apart, right? Tim, you have an interesting job because you're the head of digital media at what was a radio broadcasting company, but is obviously WBEZ and Chicago Public Media really trying to escape to other platforms or whatever you want to call it. And you have a new CEO who I guess you're going to meet today for the first time.
That's right, looking forward to it.
Who's all digital all the time?
That's the background. That's the background, and that's something the board has moved in a direction towards by obviously making this hire. But really, for the last 2 years that I've been at WBEZ, that's been the approach: is let's put down digital legs, digital footprints that allow us to stand on something, when whatever tides of technology come sweeping underneath us.
But that's not disrespecting radio broadcasting, right?
No, not at all. In fact, I came from newspapers to television to radio, and one of the things I discovered in radio is that the passion that people have for storytelling is, I don't want to say it's greater than any of the other, formats, but
I would.
But they, yeah. So I'll let you say that.
It's greater than any. Sorry.
The passion's there, and I came to WBEZ because they're renowned storytellers, and right away I discovered that there was no place to take and try to make everything text-based. If we were going to play in a digital space, it would have to be using our strength, which was audio. And once we started making that connection, people really appreciated being able to do things in the thing they felt comfortable with. Yeah. You're not asking a radio reporter to become an expert in writing web every story, which that changed the dynamic. It didn't force us to go down a road of basically saying, okay, you're gonna be good at all of these things. You're gonna be an expert videographer. You're gonna be an expert, print reporter, and as well as a radio storyteller.
But if there was ever anything that was discredited pretty quickly, it was that notion, right? That all reporters are going to be on all platforms all the time.
Except there is a generation of journalists coming up, and I'm teaching some of them at Roosevelt University, who are pretty darn good at all of them because they've been told from before the time they entered college that they will need to have the ability to spell as well as the ability to talk.
I'm not saying you shouldn't have all those skills. I'm saying this notion that you're going to go out and cover a story and then within 2 hours you're going to do everything on all. It's insane, and maybe the next generation will be able to do that. I don't know, but
let's talk about Jon Hansen's experience here because Jon is the poster boy for what we're talking about, and we did it yesterday.
Yeah. So it's
documenting heroism.
Yeah,
we'll
exactly.
Get to that.
Not being a hero, certainly.
I want to hear this. I'd like to hear you walk us through this minute by minute. What happened?
Actually, we were just treated to the story before the cameras rolled, and it's probably more interesting than our conversation. So you're standing on a platform in the subway, the Blue Line.
And the key is I'm running late, of course.
Of course.
I'm running late for work, right? And so I'm anxious. So we do what we all do. You look down the platform. You see that train coming in as if you're going to stare and it's going to come faster by you looking at the CTA operator. And all of a sudden, I'm at the end of the platform where the first car would pick me up because I'm late. I got to run up. And all of a sudden, this figure falls out in front of the train that's coming up. And I don't want to say she was 2 feet in front of the train. She fell and the train was coming into the platform. At what speed, I don't know. And there's a gasp in the Chicago Avenue Blue Line station. And everyone starts waving, stop. But then all of a sudden I see this orange blob jump down between the woman and the train and start waving his arms. And immediately, once that moment passes of this is happening, it's get out my phone. And that's the first instinct I have. And I don't know if that's
the instinct of a journalist.
Yes.
Right.
But it's also get on my phone and make sure you hit video. Don't just take pictures.
yeah.
Don't get audio, get video. So it's transferable to all medias. I can take the audio later. So I just run up to this guy. They pulled the woman up. Luckily, she's safe. And he did stop the train, interview him, and it's kind of taken off. Got in quickly to DNAinfo.com. We got the story up, and then it went through the traditional media circuit that it did. But at DNAinfo, and how I was trained at WPGU and down at U of I, is that you do have to be that multifaceted, quick person to get it up. But what I like about DNAinfo is that we don't just throw anything up there. It still goes through the rigor of the journalistic editing process.
So you had the video. I mean,
Yeah.
after this is all done,
Yeah.
how does it make its way to the public?
So I ran upstairs and got a cab, because that would be faster than the Blue Line, and got in there. And it's a matter of uploading it, editing it, because I shot the video vertical like an idiot at first and switched it over to horizontal. Editing it, and then the first thing that we do obviously is post it online, but then it's Twitter, it's Facebook, and that's how those sort of things take off.
And so your job as a journalist was to take the video. Forgive me, I'm taking over the show here, Ken, but I'm
that's
curious.
different.
I want to know how the competition works here.
Yeah.
So you had the video. Did you write? Did you record? Which multimedia skills did you bring to bear in helping to bring this story?
Well, the first thing I did was call the studio and let them know that I had this. And the nice thing about this story is I knew there was no other news. I just happened to. That was blind
You had
luck that I was there.
exclusive.
I had the exclusive.
Right.
And the fact that the train, just kept on going on its merry way once it was done. I knew this wasn't going to be a big story, that it would, the Blue Line wasn't stopped for hours. No one else was going to be privy to the situation. So I called and I just talked to a reporter, talked it through, and he quickly wrote it up, Quinn Ford at DNAinfo.com. We decided to wait until we had the video to post it. It was an interesting decision. We didn't want to post that there had been this guy to jump in front until we had edited the video and put it up there first.
Okay.
Did anyone else shoot video from
No,
the train platform?
I didn't see anyone doing it. I mean, it really happened that quickly.
It's weird
And
because you
I'm-
think everybody be pulling out
That's
the
what I'm
camera.
thinking. I think I'm getting in the cab and I'm uploading it directly.
But how many of them are associated with a major news organization?
And it was a matter of he didn't even. I had introduced myself to him as a reporter when I talked to him hours later. He didn't remember that. He just goes, "Oh, everyone has phones these days." I assumed everyone was taking video, which is interesting. So I was lucky that no one did. That was the only concern, is that someone would put it on YouTube. That's the other thing. We didn't want to put it just on YouTube because then everyone can use it. We wanted to host it
on your own
on
site.
our own site.
Right. So some of these journalism instincts still live, right? It's our shop. It's our we got to have it first. So anyway, I don't know if we actually. I think maybe I screwed up the whole beginning. I don't think we even introduced you, John. I'm very sorry.
No,
Jon
you
Hansen
did.
is here. Did I?
You
Oh, okay.
mentioned
All
it.
right. Well, John's here.
Edit this part out.
Yeah.
Okay.
John's from DNA. We don't edit. John's from DNAInfo, which of course is an online news operation. But you have the honor of taking it to the next platform, which is DNAinfo Radio Chicago. So what is it?
Well, he talked about storytelling. Tim did, and DNAinfo has 30 reporters, editors out in the streets, in the neighborhoods, covering all the local stories, the really interesting human interest stories, plus the hard-hitting stories. And they thought, let's continue to find ways to get our stories out there in some way. So I am the broadcast filter. I am the storyteller for the listening experience. It's not just me reading 24 hours a day, but it's me taking what the reporters do, talking with the reporters, interviewing them, getting firsthand accounts of what they're seeing, and also finding out who their sources are and following up with their sources and putting it in some sort of audio
So
format.
this is a 24-hour stream, right?
It's a 24-hour stream. It sounds live all the time.
Sounds like a radio station.
Sounds like a radio station. It
definitely
still
does.
takes the traditional
and
format.
we should say Rivet is different, but it's the same thing. It's a 24-hour radio station, really. I mean, you could think of it that way.
It is, and unlike DNAinfo, which is wonderfully, commendably focused on Chicago and its neighborhoods, Rivet at this point is a nationwide, worldwide news service that can be very local because the phone knows where you are. We can deliver hyper-local weather reports, traffic reports, all mixed in with this national and Chicago Metro news report.
That's such a cool concept that of course
think
your
so.
device knows where you are, so it can deliver traffic to you where you are.
If you're in the north suburbs, there's no reason for you to hear about the Stevenson or the Dan Ryan.
Right.
If you're in the south suburbs, No reason for you to hear about the Edens or the Kennedys.
Sometimes I like to think about how miserable the other people are.
Yeah.
So,
If you want, you can enter traffic into your interests and get every traffic report
It's
we
just
do
a
if you
setting.
want.
It's just a setting away,
That's
Tim.
true.
Yeah. So we're really talking about audio today, right? And what I really need to know from all of you new media guys is audio still relevant?
Yes.
Yeah, 100%.
There are more people walking around now with headphones in their ears than ever before. They're all listening to stuff.
But
I rest my case.
I kind of got the feeling, I don't know, maybe this is just me, but I kind of got the feeling that when this migration began a few years ago, that there was a kind of a conventional wisdom that audio is dead. It's all going to be video and whatever. But
Here's my theory, and I'm going to let these other guys answer.
Oh, good.
Eventually, I promise. But the internet jumped very quickly in bandwidth.
Yeah.
In the early 2000s, the late 1990s.
Broadband everywhere.
From text and photos to being able to accommodate video.
Right.
And simple audio got a pass because video was the new shiny thing.
Yeah.
I think we're kind of backtracking now, and media entities large and small are saying, oh, we missed something.
I agree. I as a user of an iPhone, as a part of the iPhone generation, I guess I got, a little past it, but I don't ever watch a video. I mean, I've hardly ever watched a link in a video on my iPhone. I don't find that experience, me personally, to be interesting. If I'm on the L, I'd much rather click something and let it come to me, or choose or click next or things along those lines, but more of an all-encompassing experience as opposed to one video, click and you're done.
the problem is too, we've taken formal television, formal radio, and we've tried to introduce it into a mobile atmosphere. And what's happening is we're creatures of habit. So when podcasts first became popular, you had to go to a computer, you had to plug in, you had to download it. That was for a very hardcore audience that really wanted to get a specific thing. Mm-hmm. You don't have to do that anymore. Now that you can stream directly to a phone and you can get at all kinds of content that is not necessarily your formal content. TV was a good example. I used to try to talk them into taking the anchor lead-ins out of the videos we were going to put online because nobody wanted to see those. But the anchors still wanted to have those in. They felt like that was their contribution.
Right,
but there's a formality there that the public just doesn't need. And they will often skip over that to go to the more informal, hey, did you see this thing today? So I think we're creatures of habit, and as technology changes that, our habits kind of have to catch up with, whatever it's at. And today, Charlie's right, everybody's got headphones in. I can't talk to my kids anymore because they got headphones, and I have to actually text them when they're doing the dishes because they got headphones and they're listening to music, they're listening to podcasts.
Oh, I mean, it just count, ride the red line some morning and count how many people have got the earbuds in, and it's probably most of the time it's the majority of the people in the car. So I think Tim's right that the initial impulse was to take radio stations and stream them and say, good, now we're on the internet, we're all up to date, right? We've got. And then they were kind of wondering why people weren't listening to the radio stream. Well, there's a good reason why, at least in mobile, that they're not. I mean, there is some place for it for people who are stuck in offices and they can't get the signal and blah blah blah. But mobile has changed everything, as the way I see it. I think mobile changed the way we think about what we consume in a way that websites and the internet did to newspapers 15 years ago. I really do think that there's almost a direct analogy to that. You've got to cut it up. You've got to localize it. You've got to personalize it. It's got to be targeted in a way that, and it's a great thing. It's the thing that radio always wished it could have done.
Well, I mean, and Ken, that I sort of lived through that transition with newspapers as a member of the Chicago Tribune, ChicagoTribune.com staff from the late '90s through the early 10s. Yeah.
Daywatch.
And saw Daywatch.
If you ever read Daywatch, he was the guy.
Thank you. And so watching the disaggregation of news stories from this entity of a newspaper. The idea that once upon a time, in 1998 when I joined the Tribune, most people got their text-based news once a day, 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, when the newspaper arrived on your doorstep or in your driveway. And you got all the stories that were picked out for you, and that was it. gradually watching this evolution over the course of more than a decade, what became clear is that stories had a life of their own on the internet. People could pick and choose individual stories. They could click on headlines that they liked and get individual stories. And then services on smartphones like my favorite is Zeit, which has now been bought by Flipboard, which is another service, let you pick and choose your own stories and line up your own interests in a way that suits you, basically composing a smartphone-based newspaper for yourself. Radio hasn't done this until
it didn't have to.
now.
It hasn't been subjected to it because it didn't have mobile to compete against.
That's right. So what we're doing at Rivet is exactly analogous to Zeit. Pick your radio stories, pick your sources, we deliver it to you.
Yeah.
What's interesting is that, you mentioned that stories have a life of their own on the internet, and I wonder, and I think this is an interesting thing, is then where does radio journalism go from here in terms of who's a journalist?
Right,
I mean,
right.
Anyone is. I mean,
Right.
even if I didn't work for DNAinfo.com, I had that scoop, I had that story.
This is the promise of the First Amendment delivered.
Right.
The First Amendment doesn't say journalists have freedom of the press. It says everybody has freedom of the press. And there are some people, some journalists, some professionals who believe this is a bad thing. I think it's a great thing that everybody who chooses to be can be a journalist. Some are good, some are bad. The good ones will build an audience. We'll find an audience in this free marketplace of ideas.
You're a marketplace guy. You believe marketplace is going to sort that out.
I'm a freedom of speech kind of guy.
See, I believe in the marketplace too. I think that people will get stories have a life of their own, though. You'll see it in everything. But I do still think that there is a place, and this is the young guy saying, there's a place for these accredited news organizations, Rivet, DNAInfo, WBEZ.
We're not accredited.
To still have the upper hand, you trust them more, and I think that a consumer will once the marketplace is flooded, eventually, maybe it already is, there still will be a premium for people that are trained in this sort of thing.
How old is DNAinfo? 4 years, 5 years?
In New York, 4 years, a year and a half in Chicago.
A year and a half, that's nothing. And so now you're accredited? You're accredited because you built trust by creating good journalism, reliable journalism that people like. But I mean, no one's anointed DNAinfo as an official source of information. You earned it. Everybody can earn it now. Used to be, if you had to suck up to a guy who had a big antenna or a big printing press to be accredited. Now you don't.
The great pressure today, though, is to be a specialist. So you have a newsroom full of really talented reporters who go after a certain beat and they really get to become experts in it. The problem with that is that you can only have so many beats. And with the internet, our interests are so widespread today that we don't have, nobody, not the Tribune, nobody can staff big enough to encompass all those interests. So you do end up finding experts in the community. Their voices start to become part of that stream of information.
All right, well, so let me ring my favorite bell here, the one that I ring all the time. Who's going to do the things that the Tribune and the Sun-Times are still doing every single day of the week, where they're raking up this stuff about who's doing what, that requires, Kochman case comes to mind, something like that requires 4 or 5 people being paid good salaries to work full-time for months at a time on something. Where's that, how does that fit in what we're talking about today? You still have to have those legacy newsrooms, not necessarily the Trib or the Sun-Times, but there has to be some kind of a critical mass group that is funded to do that kind of thing. And with all due respect, your shops aren't doing that. You guys just got a Peabody yesterday, award. Congratulations, because you're doing that kind of thing.
I want to tell you a story about just yesterday. A friend emailed me and said, I have someone who's looking for a project, looking for an investigative freelance reporter to work with them on this. Do you know anybody? And I thought long and hard, and it occurs to me that and you guys may have a different story, all the good investigative reporters I know are still employed. I don't know of a single one in Chicago who's not in demand. You may notice, as we all did, in the Tribune Company, layoffs announced a few weeks ago. They all hit administrative office holders, and there were very few, if any, that I know of, frontline journalistic reporter layoffs.
This is the part of the show where I get really nervous because I see we have 5 minutes left.
No.
Yeah, I can't believe it. Will new voices really be able to be heard, or do we have the MSNBC Fox effect where your operations are going to allow me to choose only the news that I want to hear. I want to hear news that bashes Mayor Emanuel. That's the only thing I want to hear. Now I have the chance to do that all the time. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's a good thing. I think that ultimately the more opinions that we get out there, the better. I think, and the more people reporting on these things. But like kind of Charlie alluded to as well, these stories will filter out in a way. These things, the cream will rise to the top. Maybe I'm an optimist, maybe I'm delusional, but I do feel that through that marketplace, eventually there will be a need and a want for serious local journalism, and people will be willing to pay for it.
Brian Stelter, who formerly of the New York Times, went from being, a kid blogging about television to being a New York Times reporter, to landing at CNN. I think there's a lot of people out there like that. There's passionate people who may not come up the traditional journalism channels. Their voices are going to get heard. Their stories are going to end up coming out. We're going to end up seeing, I think better stuff, and it will hopefully expand the capabilities of news operations.
I got one other pet peeve I got to bring up. Everything in the world that we're talking about comes through this tiny, tiny little corporate pipeline of Verizon and AT&T, right? It doesn't matter. All this freedom you're talking about, that freedom is allowed to you by a couple of corporations that can do whatever they want when they can choke it off when you get beyond your free, as you've pointed out. You have unlimited data until you get to about 2 gigs, and then they cut it off, right? So radio was never that. Radio is everywhere in the air, and it's as free as it can possibly be, and it is truly democratic. Anybody can listen to radio.
It's getting cheaper.
Is it gonna?
Yeah.
But will it continue to be?
I think so. I think data is going to
Corporate
continue to
shill.
get cheaper. The corporation I work for is very, very. I believe it's one guy. I think it's getting cheaper and cheaper.
Google Fiber.
Google's Fiber.
Someone will come along and provide. Everyone wants it, so someone's going to provide it.
Do you
and
believe
they're
this, Tim? You believe
I
that
think
that's
Google
not a problem?
Fiber is a huge thing. It's going to come in. It's going to sweep things out from underneath us. People are going to get in their cars and they're just going to hit the Bluetooth and plug in their podcasts.
So in our next half hour, we'll just talk about the fact that we owe everything in our lives to Google, right? So Google has replaced religion.
Yes.
It's
Well,
like
pretty
it is.
much.
It is. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, God is not dead. It is
Yeah,
Google.
it is Google, right? We have seen it, and it is Google. Oh my God, it's over. I can't believe it. Well, thank you guys. Thank you so much. Thanks Tim Akimoff. Thanks Charlie Meyerson. Thanks Jon Hansen. And check out their products. They're out there doing new things and doing them very interestingly. You've been watching Chicago Newsroom. It's a community service of CAN TV. I'm Ken Davis. We'll be back again next week. And as lame as this sounds, you can watch us on cable. You can also hear us. Watch us on YouTube and hear us on iTunes. And on Rivet. We're now on Rivet. Thanks so much. See you next week. Keep it going. Bye. And it's on Rivet and DNA Info and whatever. So.